Okay, I'm going to start the share now, and let's. I don't want to have any discussions or talks. We need absolute quiet. I assume that everyone can hear me, and everyone could understand what I'm saying. So I'm going to take this slow, and considering the fact that I'm on the audio here and on the phone call. So I'm not used to giving a share on the phone like this to such a large group of people. I really don't know how many people have called in, but I hope you can understand it. Now, this is a very advanced share. It's not an easy share, but I'm going to try and explain it from the bottom up so that everyone can really understand this share. First of all, the share is I think about the 38th year that I'm giving this share on the Ramchal's Yahrtzeit. And it's a very big source for me to give it on his Yahrtzeit. And one thing about the Ramchal, which you can say, is that he was one person that you can ask, why is God doing what he's doing? And he would be able to answer you. Even though he wasn't a prophet, he was a very special person, and he had such access to the B'nai Shalom, to God, that he could actually answer you what God was doing. So in this chus, I want to give this share, and hopefully it'll explain certain things. Now, the fundamental question that I have to ask is really a very basic question. Now, I've said in the past that the Jewish people are an organism. This is a very important concept. The Jewish people are not simply a bunch of people, individuals coming together, but they are an organism, and I've explained what an organism is. An organism is where all units of the organism work together as a team to perform a certain mission. That's an organism. It's like a baseball team, like a team which functions together, working and doing on the same thing. And Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people, are considered an organism. In other words, every person, every Jew in the Klal Yisrael, in the Jewish people, is considered as part of a team, where all the Jews together are considered as one big group, constituting a team which operates on the special spiritual mission that they have to bring the concept of Olam Haba. There's two worlds. There's Olam Hazeh, which is this world, the physical world, and there's the world of Olam Haba, which is the world to come. And in order to transform one world into another, because our ultimate destiny is in Olam Haba, the Jewish people are the main instrument which brings about the possibility of creating that world. That world, Olam Haba, lasts forever. It has no time associated with it. There's no past, present, or future which is associated with Olam Haba. It is an eternal world, and in that world we will be a very different state of being. Olam Hazeh, which is considered this world, is a physical universe. It's not only a physical universe, but it's also a spiritual universe. Both the spiritual universe and the physical universe are considered realities which exist in time. Time means that there's past, present, and future. And time and space dominate the physical world and the spiritual world, so they're both concepts in both worlds. But in the future world, there is no time anymore, and this world is therefore completely permanent. The whole function of the Jewish people is through their mitzvahs, by performing mitzvahs, to create the future world, which is called Olam Haba, which is a world that exists without time and without space. No one has any concept of what Olam Haba really looks like. No eye has seen Olam Haba. It is not present to anyone at all at the current time. So no one really knows what it is. That includes the prophets, includes Moshe Rabbeinu, includes all the angels, includes everyone. No eye has seen Olam Haba, and no one has any idea truly what this is. And it's the function of the Jewish people to what? To do the mitzvahs of the Torah and by doing the mitzvahs, transform the substance and material of the physical universe and spiritual universe into a world in which there is no time and space. It means that we have to transform the reality of one world into another. That is the function of the Jewish people and so on. Now the question that I asked that really has to do is, if the Jewish people is considered an organism, it's considered a team, how is it possible that one Jew should be an enemy of another Jew? How is it possible that there should be enemies, that people should be enemies, that there are Jews who would be enemies of other Jews, who would speak Lashon Hara about other Jews, that will actually kill other Jews? How is it possible in an organism where every unit comprises in peaceful harmony with every other unit to do this? We see what an organism is. I've defined it once before. We see what it is because the human body is an organism. It's an example of an organism. And we know that when a person, for example, loses a liver or his liver doesn't function, he has to get a new liver. And in doing that, he suddenly acquires a liver. Let's say, for example, the doctors are able to procure for him a liver from another person. What happens if you put in the liver of another person into a person who needs a liver? Well, for those people who know, the body automatically rejects it. Why? So we see from this that the body, which is an organism, all the organs of the body are not strangers. They all know each other. Every cell in the body knows every other cell, and they are not considered strangers at all. And in that regard, they are considered as one entity, as a team, and so on. So when the body gets a liver belonging to someone else outside another person, it rejects the liver. So the body doesn't want a liver, it wants my liver. It believes in getting my liver, so it has a chance to do this. And this is what an organism is. An organism is where every unit in the organism knows every other unit. There is no such thing as a stranger of one cell to another, from the liver to the heart to the brain and so on. All these cells know each other, and all these cells insist on only being together as an organism. So my question is, if you have an organism with such a unity, such a harmony between the various parts, how is it possible that in this organism suddenly some of the elements of the organism become enemies? You know, it's simply they reject each other, and they are against each other. And the definition of an organism is where every cell knows every other cell. There is no such thing as a stranger. So therefore, how is it possible for there to be an enemy where it's possible that the cells of, let's say, the stomach suddenly rebel against the organism? That's the real question. How does the organism sustain the concept of enemy? Now, to answer this question, this is a very deep question. It's a very deep question, and to answer it, I've got to explain a number of things which is not really known. The question that we all ask, another question, is why did God create physical reality? Why did he do that? And so on and so forth. God originally intended to make Olam Haba, which is a world which lasts forever, beyond time and beyond space. So why did God instead create physical reality as a predisposition, as an instance of creating a reality which precedes Olam Haba? This really is the most important question in the entire Torah, because this question has to do with why did God make us all physical beings? Why did he put our souls into a physical body? And in this body, he expects us to do certain mitzvahs, and if we don't do these mitzvahs, God then punishes us in different ways and gives us pain in our life. What's the purpose of this? Now, this is a very deep question, and I'm not going to answer it totally, but I'm going to give some idea of what it is. The answer is because something called Deksufah, bread of shame. Deksufah means bread of shame. It means that if a person were given something without working for it, without earning it, without actually be deserving it, he is shamed. He feels a certain sense of embarrassment in taking this thing. So therefore, what God did was God made us work. He made us earn Olam Haba, and the way He made us earn it, but by telling us to do mitzvahs, by doing certain mitzvahs in the Torah, the 630 mitzvahs. God expected us to do this, and therefore earn the entitlement to Olam Haba, so that we would not have shame in receiving it. And this is basically what the people say. Many Gedolim and many great people say what Nahama Deksufah is. Nahama Deksufah is the ability to earn Olam Haba through our efforts and our deeds. And by doing this, we are no longer in a state of shame, and we are go to Olam Haba feeling as if it's an entitlement, we deserve it. So Nahama Deksufah is the term that refers to the reason why God preceded Olam Haba with this word called Olam Hazeh. Now exactly, what is the concept of Olam Haba? And so on. Why? Because if God didn't want us to be ashamed, He wouldn't make us shamed. The only reason why we feel shame in receiving something which we did not work for is because God gave us that feeling to feel it. God didn't have to give us that feeling, and we wouldn't feel shame. So therefore we see that it's really a double answer. God first gives us the shame in earning something that we didn't work for. And then suddenly He punishes us if we do not earn it. So the question is, God should never be given us shame, and therefore we wouldn't have to earn it. We wouldn't have to vacate the shame by earning it. So why did God do this? And so on and so forth. And this is fundamentally one of the most powerful questions in the entire Torah. What is the reason that we have Nahama Deksufah? Why are we ashamed to receive something in which we did not work for and we did not earn? So the answer that I'm going to give is a very deep answer, and I'm going to try and make it as simple as possible. The concept which explains the whole thing is called centrality, being central. What does centrality mean? Centrality is a certain type of property where what? Where the person is central to the whole experience of reality. For example, when a person sees another person and he has a visual of the other person, what exactly is he seeing? Is he really seeing the other person? And the answer is no, he's not. What he is seeing are the images of his mind, which represents the other person in terms of a visual. A visual image is really a creation of the brain. It doesn't really exist outside of the mind. So therefore, when one person sees another person, he's really in touch with his brain, with his mind. He sees what his mind is developing, what his mind is creating as an image. He doesn't see the other person. The other person is not subject to sight. Vision cannot be seen with the eyes. Vision is seen with the mind. The mind creates the image, which we say is a visual image. The same thing with all the five senses. When a person hears a sound, what really is going on is hearing a certain production of his mind. There's no such thing as a sound. There's no such thing as a sound at all. But he's hearing his mind produce what appears to be an auditory image, which is a sound. When a person tastes a certain food, he's not actually tasting the food, but he's feeling the sensation of what his mind shows us as a gustatory image. The image of a taste is really an image which is produced in the mind, and the person associates this taste with a food. The same thing with with touching. When a person touches an object which is hard, you see it. That feeling of hardness is not in the object that he's touching. It's really in the finger, because when the finger touches the object, there are certain nerve cells that are agitated, and they force the brain to produce an image called a tactile image, which is nothing more than a hard feeling. So the feeling of hardness that is associated with an object is really a product of the mind. It doesn't exist in the object. So therefore we see something very fundamental. All of the sensations, visual, hearing, seeing, smelling, touching, and so on, all these various sensations are really nothing more than images produced by each sense in the mind. And the ego, or the self of the person, is in touch with the image that's produced in his brain. So that means that a person is never in touch with reality. A person never knows what reality is. All a person is in touch with is what's produced in his brain as an image, a reflection of what that thing, the appearance of the thing. So all we see about reality is simply appearances. We do not see anything about the reality itself. We don't even know what the reality is. But this indicates the property of centrality. In other words, the sense of self that a person has produces a sense of self-awareness. Self-awareness is when the self is aware of itself. And when the self is aware of its mind and the images that it produces, then the self is said to be aware of reality. So this is called centrality, that all of reality is known through the self, directly by the self, in terms of the images that our mind produces. This is a very important concept, because we are not in touch with reality. We are really in touch with what our mind tells us reality appears, but it's only the appearance of reality, not reality itself. Because of the fact that we have this property called centrality, you see it, we are very connected to reality in a certain way. What does that mean? When I know myself, because I have self-awareness, right? So I feel like I created reality. In some way, reality is mediated through me. So on a certain level, I feel like I'm responsible for the appearance of reality. And therefore, this gives me a certain sense of power, a certain sense of that I can do something, that I actually create reality in a certain way. So I have a certain sense of power. But at the same time, since reality is defined by a border, in other words, I know that I am an I, or I am a me. And since a me is nothing more than a self, I have a sense of myself as a me. But that means that that sense of self is bordered. It's bordered. I know that I am because I know that I have a sense of me. This is a very important thing, because at the same time as I know me and that I am responsible for the perception of reality, I also know that there's an outside. What does this mean, an outside? It means that besides me, as the fundamental arbiter of all reality, there is something outside of me. I may not know what it is, but I know there's something outside of me, because since the me part has a border, it has a gavul, a border, so therefore I also sense what's outside of the border. So when I sense my sense of self, I am sensing an inside. And when I sense a sense of not me, when my self is aware, I'm aware of two things, me and not me. The me that I sense in myself is called an inside. And when I sense a not me, that there's something outside of me, there's something beyond my border, that's called outside. Now, what is the effect of the self when he discerns an outside? Since centrality is the self that feels that I've created kind of reality, once I sense that there's an outside, I sense that there's a part of reality which I didn't create. It's not a part of me, and so on. So therefore, at any point in time, I sense two things, me, which is my sense of self, and not me, which is outside of me. What happens is that because I have centrality, when I sense the outside of me, so suddenly I feel disempowered. In other words, I feel disempowered. I feel a sense of shame. The real feeling of shame has to do with the sense of power. When I feel powerful, when I feel that I am the beginning and the end of all reality, then I feel like reality is not outside of me. But when I feel that reality is outside of me, and I am not in control, that even though I form the appearance of reality, but I don't form the existence of reality, so then I feel disempowered. And I feel that there's a dimension which is beyond me, beyond the sense of me, and is outside of me. And this creates a feeling of disempowerment, which is felt as shame. The real feeling of shame is not an emotion. It's a feeling that somehow I am less than what I think I am, that I am not the beginning and the end of reality, even though I sense reality completely in my mind. But that there's an outside of me, there's another world outside of me that also exists, and that world is called not me. It's the not me, and so on. And this is what Deksufah is. Deksufah is my ability to feel myself inside. But Deksufah really means a sense of shame that I have, because I can also feel an outside, and I feel disempowered. I do not feel at one with reality. I feel that reality is outside of me, even though the sense of reality, the ability to be aware of reality, is completely in me. This is a very powerful feeling. And to God says, is that when He created us and made us a sense of self, when He made us a sense of self who is aware of itself, He created this dichotomy that we are beings who are really selves. In other words, we are not who we think we are. What we are in essence is a self. Now, what exactly is a self? So this is what it is. When I ask you, when I say to you, who are you? If I'm looking at you as a person, and I say to you, who are you? And I say, are you your body? I see a body in my mind. Are you your body? And you say, no, I'm not my body. So then I say, well, okay, take it off. So you get outside of your body. And then I say, well, who are you now? So you say, well, it appears to be that I have a soul. So I ask you a question, and I say, are you a soul? And in the end you say, no, I'm not even a soul. I'm not a body and I'm not a soul. So then I go further and I say, then who are you? What are you? So you finally say to me, I am a sense of self. What is a self? Well, I'll tell you the truth. I don't know. Nobody knows. A self is an entity of pure consciousness. It's a purely conscious being. It is consciousness itself. Now, nobody has seen a self. Nobody sees pure consciousness. When I see your conscious, I see your body is conscious, or your soul is conscious. But I have never seen pure consciousness itself. But that's really what you are, because you are nothing more than your ability to exist. And your ability to exist comes from your sense of awareness. How do you know that you exist? Because you say to me, I am aware of my existence. And my awareness tells me that I am. So what is existence? We think that existence is a process that's given to different things that exist. But it's really not a process. Existence is nothing more than awareness. When I am aware of myself as a self, then I exist. And that's the way I exist. And that's what existence is. Now the fact is that when the self is aware of itself and feels its existence, it also feels that it is the central aspect of all reality. And when the self feels that there is something outside of it, there's something that transcends itself, there's something beyond self, it feels like it's part of an outside. And this disempowers the sense of self. And God knew this. God knew that when he created a self from his own being, God knew that when he created a sense of self, that self has the power of centrality. It thinks that it's the beginning and the end of reality. You see. But God also knew that that self would also be able to what? Be able to register the concept of reality through its mind. And that self would not be in connection, in contact with real reality. So therefore, that sense of self would have an outside feeling, that there's something outside of it. And that feeling would cause it to be disempowered or shamed. And God said, I don't want the self to go to Olam Haba, because Olam Haba is a place where our bodies don't go to Olam Haba, our souls don't go to Olam Haba. So then what about us goes to Olam Haba? The self. Olam Haba is the residence of the self, the pure sense of consciousness that I am. And that if the self has a disempowered feeling and feels ashamed, it would be a problem for the self to feel Olam Haba, because of the centrality of the self. Consciousness can feel the notion of reality, but only as an outside, and in that sense, it feels that outside is not part of it, and it doesn't control it. So it feels a disempowerment, which affects its ability to enjoy Olam Haba. So therefore, God said to us, you have to heal Olam Haba. You have to heal Nam Deksufah, the sense of shame. Because that sense of shame that you have as a sense of self is going to mitigate, it's going to interfere with your ability to truly sense in your true awareness of empowerment. So therefore, I have to give you an opportunity to heal your problem of Nam Deksufah. So what did God do? He gave us an opportunity to heal Nam Deksufah. How? Because God created a soul. And as a soul, he created a certain sense of awareness that a soul has. What exactly is a soul? So I'm going to tell you a very deep mystery. The soul is nothing more than a lens. It's a lens. That's all it is. In other words, the sense of self is embodied in a soul. And through that lens, it sees a certain reality. That's all a soul really is. It's a lens in which the sense of self, the essence of consciousness, is able to see. And that sense of self is able to be given a certain reality, the knowledge of a reality called spiritual reality. Now, what is the body? The body is really also a sense of self. It's also a sense of, it's a lens. That's all it is. We are neither a soul nor a body. Both of these things are considered lenses. The soul gives us the ability to see spiritual reality. It gives us a sense of self of spirituality. The body gives us a sense of physical reality. It allows us to see it. Now, what's the difference between spiritual and physical reality? Well, when you're in a body, everything appears as an entity. Every entity appears as an individual. Things are separated in space. That's what space is. Space is nothing more than that which separates things, till each thing appears as an individual thing. You see it. And therefore, what it does is the sense of self that's given by the body allows us to see all of reality as composed of separate entities. There's no connection between these entities. I see a book, I see a table, I see a chair. All of these entities are separate entities. And I don't see them as any connecting at all. Therefore, the entities in the physical universe are all separated and individual. And what allows me to see reality in that way? A sense of self. A sense of self that it goes on. What is the spiritual universe? How does the soul see? Well, the answer is the sense of self that we possess sees through the soul as a lens. And what does it see? Well, the difference between that and physical reality is that in spiritual reality, which we will see, unfortunately, now after we're dead, we will see not only all entities, but we see how everything is connected. Everything is considered an organism. In other words, whereas the organism concept is not visible in the physical universe because everything is seen as separate, the concept is that we see everything in the spiritual world as connected. So therefore, automatically, one soul knows another soul automatically because it's considered one organism. Every soul is seen connected to every other soul. So therefore, there's a vast difference between the soul as a lens for the sense of self, and the body as a lens for the sense of self. Behind all of these things are the sense of self. That is the real person. That's who the person becomes in Olam Haba. But in this world, that sense of self is either tied to a soul, so therefore he sees spiritual reality, the spiritual universe, which sees everything as connected, everything is associated. There's no such thing as a separate entity, you see, and that's what he sees as, and he sees through the body, where everything is disconnected and separated. But that's all the body and soul are, their lenses. So in that guise, God therefore gives us a task. He gives us a mitzvah, and he says, I want you to do the mitzvah. And when you do the mitzvah, you acknowledge me as God. In other words, that's when suddenly I become real. And you acknowledge me as the God of the universe, the creator God, and so on and so forth. God wants us to choose between the information that's given to us in the soul, through one lens, as opposed to information which is given to us through the body, which is the other lens. We have to choose between the information that we gather from our body, where we see reality is completely separated from one entity to another reality which is completely connected, which is what we see through the soul. And he wants us to choose the soul as the main lens which tells us the truth, that the body really hides reality by disconnecting all entities as separate things, as individual things. The body really tells us a lie, because that's not what the world is really like. In the world itself, everything is connected. Everything is connected with everything else, and it's all considered as part of an organism. So therefore, God wants us to choose the soul as the lens of choice, and not choose the body, which is not the lens of choice. And by choosing the soul, we slowly begin to realize who God is. That God really is the fundamental theme, the fundamental idea behind all reality. You see it. And that by seeing this thing, we gradually choose the knowledge of God. By seeing the spiritual universe as it is, we come closest to seeing the knowledge of God. So the first solution to Nahama Deksufah is really the concept of organism. It is the singular task of a Jew to understand that the whole world, everything and everyone in the world, is all part of a single organism. And the Jewish people is a single organism into itself. The world of Goyim is an organism, and the world of Jews are an organism. But the world of Jews is much higher, because the Jews have a very powerful soul, and they can see this concept in the soul. But God wants us to understand that He is part of everything, that the world is really part of one being altogether, and that He is part of everything because He made everything. So when we see that, when we see the concept that all reality is an organism, we suddenly feel that we and God are also an organism in a certain way, that we and Him are really part of an organism together, that we really are part of the same system, and therefore we belong to God and so on, and in that sense we see His unity. That's why the most important thing is to understand the Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, that there is one God. In other words, the world is an organism, and he is the master of that organism and the centerpiece of that organism. And we heal Nam Deksufah, the desire to see outside, because when we see an outside, we think that therefore the world is separate, it's composed of separately, that the inside and the outside of the being is different. But by coming to understand that the world has no outside, that it's all an organism in a way, and therefore there's really a concept of inside, we realize that we are part of God. We are not separated from God. God is not part of this organism, of this non-organism called an outside. So in a certain way, that is a certain level of Nam Deksufah. We are able to heal our Nam Deksufah, our sense of disempowerment, by feeling an outside, that we are not central, to realizing that in a certain way we do become central, because we are part of God. We are part of an organism which includes God. So therefore, God is not outside of us, but in a certain way, he is part of us. So basically, that's the idea, and that's the concept of the Torah, that the Torah gives us the ability to see who God is and what his relationship is with us. That's the concept of what God is. Now, in actuality, this appears to be a solution. It appears to be a solution to the concept of outside. But if you really think about it, it's not a solution. It doesn't satisfy the solution. Why is that? Because an organism has a certain yichud, or a certain unity. But that yichud is founded on the fact that an organism is a yichud in function. Every component in the organism has a certain function connected to the function of the whole. Every specific organ in the human body serves the human body and keeps it alive. Each thing has a separate function. The stomach, the liver, the brain, the heart, each organ has a different function. And together they allow the body to live because they create the concept of life. So there's a certain yichud on the concept of organism. There's a certain unity in the concept of organism. But that concept is a unity of function. So therefore, in certain ways, I feel connected to God as a function. But I don't feel connected to God in terms of real being. Why? Because a liver is separate from a stomach, which is separate from the heart, which is separate from the brain. These are all separate organisms. Each one has a sense of itself, but its sense of another organ is separate from it. It all believes that they're part of the same team. But even members of the same team are considered separate individuals. And if they're separate individuals, there's a separate outside. So therefore the concept of outside is true even of an organism. And that's why an organism can have enemies. That's why different organs can become an enemy, even though it's an organism. Because even though they work together for the same purpose, but suddenly they can be disconnected to each other because they are separate in being. And since they are separate in being, they are separate in function. And so therefore we see that the concept that we all are an organism does not satisfy the disempowerment. In other words, the sense of self which we all are still has a sense of empowerment. Even though we are all part of an organism, we are still separate individuals. We are not disconnected, that's true, but we are still separate independent entities. And it's possible to be enemies as long as we are separate entities. So then the question really becomes, what is the healing for Nam Deksufah? How do you get rid of the shame of feeling that there's an outside, that God is outside of us? God is outside, and He created us, but He has nothing to do with us directly because He's part of our outside. And therefore, since we do not register Him as part of our inside, we are disempowered. We are not the complete arbiters of reality. That there's a reality which exists outside, and because of the fact that the sense of self is so exalted, because of the sense of self encompasses the ability to see, to know the five senses, that it knows reality. It feels disempowered. So therefore, how does it remove it? The concept of organism is not enough to give the soul, the sense of self, the ability to be empowered. So therefore, the sense of organism is close. It brings things together. But it brings things together in function. It does not bring things together in being. So then, what is the solution, really, to Nahama Deksufah? Now, the answer is a very deep answer, and it's really something that you'd never expect. It would be a surprise. Some people understand what I'm saying, and some people not. But most of you can understand it intellectually. What is the solution to the sense of disempowerment, to the sense of outside, between the sense of self as it exists and the concept of God? How are they connected, basically? And the answer is a four-lettered word. Love. Love. We all know what love is. Everybody is after it. Everybody wants to be loved. But what really is love? And when do we feel love? And what does real love feel like? Now, it's unfortunate that many people go through life never really knowing what love is. That's a fact. You see it? People get married. People have girlfriends, they have boyfriends, but many of them are not in love. They like each other. So you think that liking someone is being in love, and that's not true. Because let me tell you what the real feeling of love, what it really is. When you love another person, when you truly love another person, you do not feel that that person is outside of you. You feel like that person is you. In other words, you feel at one with another person who you really love. You do not have this feeling for someone you don't love. You don't feel like they are part of you, and so on and so forth. So in other words, if we really love a person with our entire being, we feel like that person is me. He's part of me, like he's my inside. That's the power of love. Love is a tremendous power of unification. Like the first love that took place on the planet was from Adam and Chava. Adam loved Chava, and Chava loved Adam. Why? Where does the feeling of love come from? Where does it come from? Well, the fact of the matter is, Adam and Chava were originally one person. That's right. Male and female was considered one person, and they were considered together. In some way, they were two bodies bound together. But what did God do? God wanted to teach them the feeling of love so that they would have that feeling for Him. God wanted people, or sense of selves, or selves themselves, to have a feeling of love for Him. So therefore, He wanted to give people the prime example of love. So therefore, He took the male and female part of a human being, which were once together, and He separated them. And this separation now results in a feeling of love, because all love is a desire for two things that were once one person to come back together and become that one person again. In other words, it's a recapitulation, it's a restoration of what you were before. And that's the concept of a zivug. A zivug is very different than the concept of organism. Whereas an organism is a number of different organs that work together, or a number of different components that work together to produce a certain result. A zivug is not that. A zivug really are two people who are once united and connected in being, who are suddenly separated into two separate beings. And what results is a feeling of love, a desire to come back together, to be one again. They want to restore that unity that they once possessed. Now they can't do that. They really can't do that, and so on. But they can do it in the feeling of love, because that feeling of love that they suddenly possess, the true feeling of love, is the feeling that you and I are the same person. That I don't consider you as a separate person. I don't consider you as an outside me. When a person loves another person, he does not see an outside, even though that person is separate. So therefore, since he does not see an outside, he does not feel disempowered at all. He feels empowered, because when one person is truly in love with another, he cannot stop thinking of the other person. The very fact of his thinking of the other person is considered a tremendous joy. Associated with the feeling of love is the feeling of joy. And there's nothing that gives joy in this world as the feeling of love. That's why everybody is after it. Everyone wants to be loved. They want to be in love because they want to feel this feeling of unity with somebody else. Because that feeling is so profound, you feel like one person with that other person. So this is what God says. I am separating Adam from Eve into two different people, and I am making them feel this feeling of love because they were once together. This feeling of love is the exact feeling that they should have for me. They should have this feeling for me, and then they will realize that I am not outside of them. I, God, am not outside as a separate entity from the self, the person. But I am one with that person. That person and I are really connected in such a deep way that when that person thinks of me, he will be totally in love with me. And in that sense, that remains a tremendous boon. So the real cure for Nam Deksufah is love. It's not the feeling of an organism. It's even deeper than that. It's the feeling of a zivug, of being in love with someone who was once part of you. And since we were once part of God, we were once part of the entity of God, we were once part of a being called God, we have the ability to be in love with God. I know this is a very difficult concept for people to realize, because you can't even see God. You have no ability to know God through the sensations. So therefore, how can you love God? But the fact is that you can, because you come from God. And since you come from God, God is not outside of you. He's still inside of you. He is part of your sense of consciousness, your sense of self. And when you suddenly feel that overpowering love for God, you suddenly will understand that there is no outside. That the sense of outside that you feel, because you think that God is not part of you, He is part of you. And therefore you will not have a separate feeling as if He was outside. And this is the healing cure for Nam Deksufah. Where do we see this? Where do we see this concept of love in the Torah? Well, if I asked you a certain question, right? And what's the question that I ask? What are the two greatest mitzvahs in the Torah? The two greatest mitzvahs in the Torah. What would you tell me? I mean, there are many mitzvahs. There's Shabbos, Kashrus, many mitzvahs in the Torah. But if I asked you what were the two greatest mitzvahs in the Torah, what would you tell me? And the answer is very simple, if you really think about it. The answer is love. Because what does it say in the Shema? Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And then it suddenly says, Yahrtzeit Hashem lekecha, and you shall love God. So you see, the greatest mitzvah in the Torah is to love God. But you may say to me, but I can't even see God. How can I love God? Because you come from Him. And therefore God is not outside of you, is that someday when you feel Him, you will feel Him as inside of you. And that is the true love of God. That's what it means, V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha, and you shall love God. So that really is the solution of Nam Deksufah. God says that in order for you to cure the disempowerment, you have to love me, and you will love me as soon as you realize who I am to you. And by doing the mitzvahs that are associated with the Torah, you will become to love me. There's a certain mitzvah called mitzvah lishma. What does that mean? That means that when you do a mitzvah, why? Because you love God. Now I know most of you don't do mitzvahs at all like that. You do mitzvahs because you have to do mitzvahs, or because you were taught to do mitzvahs. But there's not that feeling. But if you started to do mitzvahs because you loved God and you wanted to bring Him a simcha, that feeling of love would become real. It would start to come out. And as you feel that love of God, it's an incredible feeling. It's all empowering. Because suddenly it would grip your entire being and you would become a totally different person. You and God would be lovers. And that's really what God wants. God wants you to know Him and to love Him by being lovers in that way. I mean, if you can love God the same way that Adam loved his wife, that is real love. And that's what God expects and which is possible. But you have to try and do a mitzvah lishma. You have to do a mitzvah in God's name because He requested it. And when you do these mitzvahs, you combat the Yetzer Hara, which tells you that God is outside of you. The evil inclination tells you that God is outside. And God will always be outside. It's a form of disconnect. But the Yetzer Tov, the good inclination, tells you no. God is not outside of you. He is inside of you. So that when you think of yourself and you're aware of your own existence, you automatically at the same time will become aware of God's existence. And that will be Olam Haba. In Olam Haba, the Jewish people become nothing but lovers of God. That's all it is. We will all be lovers of God because we will feel about Him the way we feel about someone that we are totally in love with. And that really is Olam Haba. And the simcha of that is astounding. It's literally astounding. So therefore we see what's possible. Now, once Adam sinned and Eve sinned, they did sin. They ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So what happened? So after that, the Torah tells us the story of Cain and Havel, the two sons of Adam Rishon. Adam Rishon had two sons, Cain and Havel. And it turned out that Cain became jealous of Havel because he thought that the sacrifice that Havel was bringing to God was more precious than his. He brought animals, and Cain brought animals, and Havel brought vegetables. But Havel really wanted to brought the sacrifice because he really loved God, and Cain did not bring it for that reason. So therefore, Cain became very jealous of Havel, and he knew that Adam Rishon, after the sin, died, so he knew that he can kill Havel, and he finally killed him. He hit him with a rock and so on, and he killed Havel. Now what does this mean? What did Cain do? What does it mean that Cain killed Havel? You know what? So actually to understand this is a very deep thing. Why does the Torah tell me the story of Cain and Abel, of Cain and Havel? What do I have to know this for? Why do I have to know a story where one brother kills another brother? Really? You know what I mean? What is that about? Because the Torah is telling us a very deep thing about this. Adam Rishon had the possibility of correcting his Nam Deksufah, where he would come to know God as an act of love. When Adam sinned, the world changed. And what changed most in certain ways was that Adam suddenly died. He didn't die before the sin. Before the sin of Adam, he was never supposed to die. But after he sinned, death came into the world. So in other words, he did not solve the problem of Nam Deksufah. God was still on the outside, and he still felt disempowered. But when Cain and Havel were born, originally they were simply extensions of Adam. Even though Adam had two sons called Cain and Havel, in the beginning, these two sons were simply extensions of Adam. They were not sons the way we know today. They were not really separate people from the parents. In a certain sense, they were still connected to their parent as extension. This is a very deep concept, and I'm not going to go into it. But after the sin of Adam Rishon, they became separate people. So therefore, Cain and Havel, for the first time, became separate brothers. They became two brothers that saw each other separately, as if each one was outside the other. What does this mean? This means that the problem of Nam Deksufah was compounded. Why? Because in the beginning, when Adam was created by God, it was God who was seen as outside of Adam. The problem of Nam Deksufah extended to God, and God was seen as outside. So therefore, Adam had to fix his relationship with God, where now he saw God as inside. But he didn't do that. Instead, he sinned. So therefore, the problem of Nam Deksufah extended itself. Why? Because not only was God outside of Adam, but suddenly the two brothers were outside of each other. In other words, before the sin, the two brothers were really extensions of each other. But after the sin, they were two separate beings outside of each other. So the feeling of Nam Deksufah, which disempowers the sense of self, was even more compounded. Because not only did Cain and Havel feel outside of God, they felt that God was outside of them, which was the original problem of Nam Deksufah. But they felt now that each of the brothers was outside. So Cain saw Hevel as being outside of him, and Hevel saw Cain as being outside of him. They both had the feeling of Nam Deksufah to their own brother as well as to God. So therefore, the feeling of Nam Deksufah was compounded and made more difficult. So why did God tell us the story of Cain and Havel? Because it's simply this. If Cain and Havel would have been able to heal their Nam Deksufah by loving each other, if Cain and Havel could establish a brotherly love, then somehow that would have corrected the sin of Adam Rishon. When Adam sinned, he foiled God's plan. But that plan could have been resurrected. How? Through Cain and Havel. Cain and Havel, since they had a new form of Nam Deksufah, would have been able to love each other. And that love that they have for each other would have fixed the Nam Deksufah problem that Adam Rishon had with God. So in other words, this story is told to us because it was told to us as the only possibility to heal the sin of Adam. So even though Adam and Chava sinned in the first place against God, Cain and Havel, by establishing a love between the two brothers, could have fixed the problem of Nam Deksufah. And then we would have been in a totally different place. Because then, if they would have fixed the problem that their father had, they would have created Olam Haba. Because the Olam Haba was supposed to be created by Adam and Eve. Or Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve. Had they not done the sin, then that Shabbos, they were created on Friday. But that Shabbos would have been Olam Haba. History would never have gone on. And if Cain and Havel would have been fixed themselves in the love they have for each other, then suddenly the problem of Nam Deksufah would have been fixed. And that would have been the beginning of Olam Haba. And history would never have continued. So because Cain hated his brother and he killed his brother, he doubled the sin of the problem of Nam Deksufah. And therefore, the world would have to go on for the next several thousand years. All because of Cain and Havel. Now, where do we see, therefore, that there's a mitzvah to love your brother? We know that there's a mitzvah to love God, and you shall love God. And we understand how that's possible, because God is in us. But how is it possible to love your brother? Right? Because it says there's another mitzvah in the Torah, which is the second greatest mitzvah in the Torah. And that's the mitzvah of what? That's the mitzvah of what? Of your Yahavta l're'acha kamocha. What does that mitzvah say? And you shall love your brother as yourself. Why does it say the word as yourself? It's just simply saying you should love your brother. Because God is telling you in that verse why you should love your brother. Why? Because he is you. Your brother is you. He's another form of you. And since he is you, you two are really connected. And therefore you have the full capacity to love your brother. So now the mitzvah of love is divided into two parts. The love between man and God, and the love between man and man. So therefore we see that love takes itself now in two forms. The love of God and the love of your brother, your fellow Jew. And that's where the mitzvah comes from. Why is God so insistent that we love each other? Why does God want us to be so close to each other where we do all kinds of things out of an act of love? Why does he want this? Why is God obsessed that Jews do not love each other? They speak lashon hara about each other. They do all kinds of bad things to each other. Why is God obsessed with the lack of harmony in the Jewish people? Because there's another mitzvah where a Jew must love another Jew. And that mitzvah is part of our nature. If we realize what another Jew, that another Jew is part of us, he is more than an organism. If it would be an organism, there would be a unity, a function. But another Jew is more than an organism. He is us. So therefore there's a unity of being. There's a unity of being. And God says, since there's a unity of being, you have the full capacity to love each other. So therefore we see that the two greatest mitzvahs in the Torah are acts of love. And why are they acts of love? What does God want us to do? By loving him and loving another Jew. He wants us to solve the problem of Deksufah, which is the reason why he created the physical universe. Because he wants to realize that we have no outside. That just like we see the results of our mind when we see reality, we are directly in touch with our mind and not in touch with reality. And that's called centrality. We are the center of reality. And therefore we should have no outside, you see it. And God wants to realize we have no outside by suddenly realize that what? That he wants us to feel like we are part of each other. And therefore, by feeling that, we will not feel like there's an outside. In other words, we still maintain this centrality. Because God is part of us and another Jew is part of us. In such a close unity that it's everything involved. So this is the essence of Judaism. The essence of Judaism is for us to regain our power. And that power is the power of centrality, that we are the beginning and end of reality. All reality is mediated through us. And God wants us to realize that we have no outside. God is not outside. He is part of us. And neither is another Jew. He is actually part of us. And when we're zocher to do these two mitzvahs in the full madrega, all the mitzvahs in the Torah are divided into two classes. The first class is called the mitzvahs between man and God, like Shabbos, Kashrus. And the mitzvahs in the Torah, the second category of the mitzvahs, is between man and man. And God wants us to realize, like for example, giving tzedakah, speaking nicely to another person. All these are mitzvahs between man and man. And both sets of mitzvahs are what's required to take away the feeling of disempowerment, the feeling of shame, or the feeling that our centrality is compromised. And when we do that, that's exactly what it is. And this is the essence of Judaism. Everything I've said tonight is the essence of Judaism. It is the most important thing of Judaism, of Kol HaTorah Kula. Because everything is surrounded by the love that we have for God and the love we have for the fellow Jew. So this is the share of what I'm going to say tonight. I realize the concept is hard. It's not an easy concept. I apologize for that. But you can listen to this share again. You can listen to over and over again. Anyone who wants to do that will call Shlomo Tress, and he'll give you his number. But you will have the ability, because this shiur was recorded tonight. So I advise you to listen to the shiur over and over again. It's not an easy shiur, because the concept of centrality is not an easy concept. The concept of outside is not an easy concept, that it's a form of disempowerment. So that's the shiur that I'm giving tonight, and I thank you all for listening to the shiur as a specific cover for the Yahrtzeit of the Ramchal.
Right. Shimon, do you want to take questions?
Okay. I'll take some questions if anyone has any questions.
Shimon, the oneness between us and God and the oneness between us and a fellow Jew, is that the same? Hello? Shimon. Yeah. Okay, go.
Wow, that is brilliant.
Are there any other questions?
Music. Just stay outside.
Themselves. Q&A session is over. All participants are unmuted.
Hello, Reb Shimon.
Yeah.
Hi, Shimon. How are you?
Hi.
I'm trying. Reb Shimon, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, Reb Shimon, first of all, thank you so much. I'm sitting here with Reb David Hammer. We have a question. The others, at the end of the day, at least Yaakov Avinu had more than one wife. So how do you explain the concept of zivug when person you can have more than one wife?
Some questions are pretty good.
Well, the fact of the matter is, the real zivug of Yaakov was Rachel, and later on he married the other ones, but they were not his real zivug. As far as Klal Yisrael was concerned, they were part of Klal Yisrael. But the real zivug of Yaakov was Rachel Imenu.
So even though the Torah says you can have more than one wife, there's really one zivug, true zivug.
Yeah, but that was later on. By Adam Rishon, before the sin, he only had one wife, and that was Chava. He only loved one woman. He did not love more than one woman. But after the sin, it became possible to marry more than one woman. That's a whole different discussion, because everything changed after the sin.
Ask him about it.
Well, you're saying it's only post.
Right, post.
But Shimon, the way you're explaining that a person is, so to speak, centric, and then he's able to be, connected to the Rabbi Shalom. Is that? I mean, that's not a problematic that a person sees himself in a centric way?
Why is that a problem?
Well, because the Rabbi Shalom is eccentric, and we're the ones who revolve around the Rabbi Shalom.
No. You are not part of God. God is part of you.
Can I get a little bit of a first explanation on that?
Well, not really. If you call me up privately, and I'll work on that with you.
All right, I can live with that.
Okay. So I guess I'm going to get off, and I want to thank you all for listening to this shiur.
Thank you very much.
Shimon?
Yes.
Shimon, you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. How would you explain a little bit the matter going on today with the virus? Just like your basic take on it.
Take on what?
On the matter today, the whole corona story, the whole
Hello? I gave a YouTube share on that.
What?
I gave a share on YouTube on the coronavirus. It's 2.5 hours long, and you'll put on the YouTube Rabbi Shimon, Kessin, COVID-19, and you'll hear a 2.5 hour share on that.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Shimon.
Sure, be well.
Thank you.